Hey, everybody. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Amy. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Yay.
Me too. You guys, we're doing a collab. I am here with Melissa Reich, your Bish therapist. And Melissa.
Hello, everybody. Yes. And I'm here with the fabulous, the one and only Miss Amy Phillips from Drama Darling.
I had to add in my own little sound effect to pump us up. What?
Yeah.
So cool to be here with you, Melissa. We have a lot of work to do, and dare I say, you're going to be doing the lion's share of this. And I will be like a fan in the front row seats, just cheering you on as you talk about what we're going to discuss. So we've done our work. Hopefully you guys have heard about this. And if you haven't, buckle up, because we're going to take you on a real ride telling the story and giving professional insights from your Bish therapist and clownish insights from your drama darling Bish wife.
Don't say that.
We're talking about Belle Gibson. We're covering the documentary, which is what, Melissa?
It is The Search for Instagram's Worst Con Artist, which is the documentary on Belle Gibson. But you also watch something called Apple Cider Vinegar.
Yes.
Which was what would they call that? Not a mockumentary.
A very loose dramatization. And it's a series. It's a drama series, and it was over on, I believe, Netflix. Where am I watching it? I think it's Netflix.
Yeah, I think so.
And it's like a 8-part series, which that's why I was like, Melissa, can we push another hour? Because I hadn't even finished it yet, because it was so good. And it really, but it is not, it is based on Belle Gibson and other influencers, health influencers and that, and other things. So it is not a true story factually. So just know that going in.
Right, because I know, so I took notes on the Instagram's Worst Con Artist, because I felt that was, for me, where the breadth of clinical information would lie.
Absolutely.
But, you watched, I've heard, Apple Cider Vinegar was so interesting and fascinating, and it kind of took Belle Gibson and Scamanda, an amalgamation of all of these scam artists, which I'm just like, as a 2-time cancer survivor and a sassy Bish therapist, I cannot wait to read these people for filth today. I'm so excited.
I mean, what a perfect person to be talking about this from 2 huge angles. As you said, you're a cancer survivor, and you're also a licensed therapist. So, by the way, I did watch the documentary. Of course, obviously, to get my bearings. And then I was just so interested to do some other, and I ran out of time I wanted to do even more deep dive on Belle Gibson and watch more videos and all those things. So, but why don't we start, obviously, with, you probably have a beginning point as to how you want to begin this. So Melissa, take us there.
Sure. So for those of you who haven't watched the series, I will just kind of describe briefly what it is that we watched. It was actually only 2 episodes, but those 2 episodes were so rich with so much knowledge. Mm-hmm. So what they did was, throughout the episode, they had a variety of journalists, friends, and community members who were scammed by Belle, friends from growing up. They had neurosurgeons. They had a really wonderful, I believe she was a psychologist, and it was like a symphony of all of these people coming together,
and her brother.
Share. Oh my gosh! Yes, and her brother and her stepdad.
Oh yeah, her stepdad.
Yes. So her mom unfortunately passed away, but the brother and the stepdad, who I would argue are her harshest critics.
Yes.
Everyone was interviewed, and it gave puzzle pieces to this bigger picture of what is this about? Because so Amy and I talked off air about, you've talked about Scamanda with Emily and some other darling. And so this we wanted to stick to Belle Gibson, but I also did an episode where I talked about a woman. She was a writer for Grey's Anatomy, Elizabeth Finch, who also faked cancer.
We talked about that over on Drama Darling as well. Yes.
Okay. All right. And so what's fascinating to me and what I'm going to start with is just that each of these people, so specifically Scamanda, Belle Gibson, and
Elizabeth
Finch, they're all so different in what I believe is the underlying pieces to maybe why they did what they did. And so I'm really interested to talk about Belle, because I think out of Scamanda and out of Elizabeth Finch, I personally believe that those two people are more antisocial. So, and let me be clear, I'm not diagnosing anyone. I've never met these people. I have no idea who they are. That would be irresponsible and inappropriate. But what I'm going to do is take the behavior and talk about, because really what we're talking about here is we're talking about a couple of psychological pieces, which is lack of empathy, antisocial behaviors, right? Narcissism. And where does narcissism fall into a personality disorder? Then there's the old we used to call it Munchausen syndrome. It's no longer called that. It's now called factitious disorder. And just fun fact, because I'm a nerd like this, the only reason it's called something different is because Munchausen was this guy in 1900s Germany who was like a tall tale teller. And so in terms of psychology, it just wasn't really a super accurate name. It was
he sounds like a troll that lives under a bridge, I mean, it's a very, it's like he's spinning gold, on a wheel. That's what it sounds like. So yes, in fact, what's so funny is that I was talking to my therapist. I mentioned, Munchausen. It's now called factitious disorder. And she was like, well, look at you, She's like,
how'd you know that?
I'm like, yeah. She's like, dare I even ask, because I know you watch all that stuff, but so fascinating. And yes, that is, they're getting away from naming conditions and diseases or what have you after people and putting more of an accurate description to what it is. And that's a perfect example. So I love that you pointed that out.
Yeah. I mean, with psychology, it's a growing science. We're always growing and learning. And so, you just do better once you know better, because who gives a hoot about Baron Munchausen, which was his name. And it does give credence to he was living under a bridge spinning gold or something. What a name. But anyway, so it is now just called factitious disorder or factitious disorder imposed on another. So in the case, for example, of Gypsy Rose, that would have been factitious disorder imposed upon another. And so it's a symphony for me in terms of figuring out what parts of all of these disorders or tendencies led to such a significant con, because Belle Gibson arguably was the biggest con. Probably, I don't know, Elizabeth Finch, that was pretty huge too. But Belle Gibson, she had an app with the Apple.
Right.
She worked with Apple. It was on the Apple Watch, and it was all completely based on a lie.
The most financial gain, perhaps.
I believe so, because at the end of the episode, I did write here, there was a civil lawsuit for her fraudulent claims of giving to charity when she really didn't. And she was fined $415,000, which of course she refused to pay that fine, of course, and there's been no consequences whatsoever.
Right. And she's not in jail.
No.
She is not, they haven't taken her, I think there was a trial where then she had to pay this amount, but she did not get legal consequences for what she did because of these charities. She was saying she was raising money for different charities, and then they never received the money, obviously.
Right. But and Belle Gibson is from Australia, right? And so with these different cases, one of the reasons I think that, Scamanda, she got 5 years jail time. And Elizabeth Finch didn't. She had some trouble, but it wasn't. She's also kind of just like walking around free. What I find fascinating is that I don't know how things work in Australia, but I think that because Belle Gibson, she defrauded human beings, and with Scamanda, she defrauded the government.
Yes.
And if you defraud the government in the United States, they're going to come packing. And they don't care if it's $5 or $5,000, they're going to take you down. And I think Australia must be different, and I don't think she messed with the government.
Yeah, because she wasn't even like licensed. I mean, she didn't even have an actual charitable organization set up to even defraud. So like the money didn't even go into an actual company that's a charitable organization. So maybe there was some loophole in there where they couldn't quite get her. Seems worse almost. But anyway.
Well, it does seem worse because you're taking money from real people who, needed help and aid and charity, like people who were really struggling. So I guess, how I'll lay this out is, for me, I also understood watching this some things that maybe other people don't, because I am very fully integrated with the cancer community. And the cancer community, it's a large community of people who are very vulnerable, who are always looking for, how can I make my life better? What can I do to extend my life or decrease chances of, having a relapse or reoccurrence? And so what I understand about this that maybe some people don't, that I wanted to share initially, is that Belle Gibson was able to take such control because she was so tapped into the cancer community. And that, for me and for so many other people, is, I think, one of the major issues, is that what Belle Gibson did, and believe me, this grift is not new, because it's actually, I will share a personal story. I fell victim to a grift like this. I didn't even tell you this, Amy, because I wanted it to be a little surprise.
Well, boom.
So when
Buckle up, baby.
When I was first diagnosed, so I had ovarian cancer when I was 17. That was stage 3C. I was not expected to survive. There were hospitals that wouldn't even treat me. They recommended hospice. And so then my parents took me to CHOP because I was 17. And then when they found out that it was ovarian cancer, they took me to University of Pennsylvania. In Philadelphia. And they saved my life. I survived. I wasn't supposed to. And then when I was 35, I'm 44 now, I was diagnosed with a chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is a chronic cancer that I will live with. And there is no cure at this point. But medical technology has been great up until this point, if there's no interruptions to that. But, and so when I first got diagnosed, it's, CLL is a slow growing cancer. And, it's, by the way, it's a common thing. I think Scamanda initially said that she had some sort of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And the reason why people will do that is because, look at me, I look great. I have great hair. I look, my skin looks great. Whatever.
You look fabulous. You've got charisma. You're popping and locking. So people tend to use that diagnosis because you can't visibly see it.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And there are some cases with lymphomas that are more aggressive and they are quicker growing. Like mine is a chronic, more indolent, but there are some that are more aggressive. And so the point is
what
that
does indolent mean?
It just means slow growing over time. Like it's not going to kill you quick. It's just going to like get you real slow.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, so when I was first diagnosed, I having cancer for the second time, my PTSD was out of control. And at that point, I was not with a good therapist who could really help me. And so what happens with cancer survivors is you think that there's something you can do to control your cancer. And I'm going to be the first one to say that you can't. You can't. Because if you could control your cancer with food, nobody would have cancer. And so I think that I fell for, I don't know if I should say the name of, like, he's still like out there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know if I should say, Amy.
Well, have they been outed as a scam artist?
No, he's just still doing his thing. Maintain. So, okay, I'll say it. And then if we need to, I don't know.
Why not? How about don't say it?
Okay.
And then you can, you know what I mean? How about go the reverse? Don't say it.
Okay, go the reverse.
And
fine.
then if you decide you want to talk about it, you can name them in the description.
Fair enough.
Tag them.
Fair enough.
Name them. But also, I mean, if they're doing damage, I mean, why aren't they in trouble?
Well, and this is why. So this is a person who had a stage 1 cancer, which listen, stage 1 cancer is still cancer. I'm not stepping on that, but having a stage 1 cancer is vastly different from having an end stage cancer. And so, and also sometimes it doesn't matter what stage the cancer is, the type of cancer really matters. For example, blood cancers, lymphomas, they are very hard to get into a prolonged remission because the cancer's in the blood, the bone marrow, and the nodes, and you can't remove that, right? And so it's very, very tricky. And so my point is I've learned a lot about these grifters, and I fell for one in terms of this, this guy was like, I just got the surgery to get this removed, and then I started eating well, and I cured my own cancer. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I can do that too. And what ended up happening was I ended up with an eating disorder because I listened to the bullshit and I thought, well, if I just ate vegan or plant-based or cut out sugar or did all these other things, that I would prolong my life and I wouldn't have to do treatment and all of these other things. And so the time came, things progressed despite the fact that I did all the right things. I didn't drink alcohol. I drank nothing but water. I'm telling you, I followed like a Belle Gibson playbook, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what these grifters do. They look at these meals and they say, well, this is anti-inflammatory and blah, blah, blah. But, and I realized that it was a whole bag of bullshit that I had been served on a plate, and I felt foolish for being taken advantage of. I felt foolish, and I felt very, just vulnerable. And so what ended up happening was I got in with a wonderful therapist who I see now, and she got me in with a nutritionist, and we just had to break through all of that misinformation about, like our bodies, for example, when you eat a donut versus when you eat like pasta, your body doesn't calculate like meat more. This is pasta and this is a donut. It's like your body breaks stuff down into sugars, fats, carbs, it's like when you look at the science behind it, you kind of take away that mysticism. But so for me, this is really personal because I did feel duped, and I did feel I was really messed up for a long time because I had convinced myself that I can't eat certain things. And so I'm here to tell people, if you are listening to this and you have cancer, you're a cancer survivor, eat the donut, eat the cookie, eat whatever it is you want, all things in moderation. And there is not one right thing for every single person. Individuals are unique as snowflakes, physically, mentally, emotionally. And so it's finding what works for you. But what sometimes happens is people get discouraged by, Belle Gibson was saying, well, I don't drink alcohol, which was a lie. She did. I had stage 4 brain cancer. That's what Belle Gibson said that she had. So just to be clear, she said she had a stage 4 brain cancer. She was diagnosed that she had 4 months to live.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden she started eating healthy. And you look at her and she's the picture of health. She look much like me, right? I mean, picture of health. She looks very fit. She looks, and so everyone would look at her and think, wow, look at what this woman's doing. So what she did was she played with cancer, people with cancer, their emotional experiences to say, you need to just work harder. Buy this app, make this meal. You're not working hard enough. And the fact is that cancer is a very formidable force. It doesn't give a shit what you eat. I mean, food is medicine, right? That it does matter, but cancer does not care.
And the whole pantry idea, which, by the way, started, I believe, this was around 2013 that she started posting, right, on Instagram. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like, if you want to call it an addiction, it looks like an addiction to attention that she had been trying to get her whole life with a lot of these, cry wolf health situations. And she found a platform where she could start getting the attention that she needed. And the whole pantry was a product that was a step further from her just being on Instagram and sharing her story and getting a lot of likes and a lot of love for that and the attention that she wanted. But then she monetized that into an enormous, huge thing, which became her brand, which we know she started another brand before that, and that didn't work. And so then this almost seemed like a business plan that matched up with who she was as a fraud that's been bubbling underneath the surface from the get-go.
Absolutely. It was like the Big Bang, that, the theory in science is that the Big Bang started the universe. And I would argue it was circumstances similar to the Big Bang, where it was just like she had morphed into having the right look because, to be a good cancer patient, you have to be thin. God forbid you have any weight on you, which is also bullshit. Thin privilege is very real. She had blonde hair. She had hazel eyes. She had she was by all accounts attractive. And that does make a difference as well, right? When you're buying a health and wellness app, she reminds me of like Gwyneth Paltrow a little bit. She had that Gwyneth Paltrow goop sort of shtick going on. And I think that it just caught fire so immediately, because what's wild here is that she seemed like she was just a good business person. Like, if she could have left the lies, her pictures were gorgeous. The Instagram was gorgeous. The app was amazing. It was preloaded onto the Apple Watch in 2014. Like, she couldn't just let that go. She couldn't even let it go and say, I'm a survivor of cancer. She had to continually say, at one point,
down.
She said,
my God, it spread.
Not only doubled down, but
blood,
said in
spleen,
things,
uterus, liver. I mean, are you kidding me?
And let me tell you, as someone who's had cancer twice, spleen cancer is not a thing. It's like, that's what's so crazy too about Belle. It's like, if you had stage 4 malignant brain tumor, which, by the way, there are tons of different types of brain tumors. There are some that are cancerous. There are some that are non-cancerous. The neurosurgeon that was featured on this episode, her name was Professor Kate Drummond, and she was very, very smart. And she basically called out how insanely ridiculous it is to claim, like, Scamanda, she was smarter about how, like, she claimed, certain things were happening that maybe could have happened. But what Belle Gibson
had a lot
did
of
was
attention to
down.
detail. Scamanda really went in on the details. She was very detail oriented, with everything that she was putting out there and showing everybody everything. Whereas Belle was not.
Right. And so for me, I feel like with Belle, there is a mental health component here that I don't think Scamanda or Elizabeth Finch have at all. I think they're both antisocial. I think they're both people who, theoretically speaking, again, I don't know them. I think that women are so frequently like written off as the gentler sex, or like, especially if a woman is attractive and thin, it's like, oh, well, you couldn't be evil. Women are just as evil as men. The difference is they get away with it because society doesn't like to hold pretty women accountable. They don't. Mm-hmm. And so I think that with Belle Gibson, this neurosurgeon said, there was a particular word that really stuck with me, and said that if she was saying all these things that were happening, she would be moribund, which is a clinical term for in the state of dying. And when, like, I've been dying before, I know what that feels like. And so you wouldn't be like, you know, having this glossy, glorious hair. And, you know, when people have brain tumors, and it impacts like the way that their eyes move and things, like it just impacts so much. And so it was just really apparent that she was lying, but then she doubled and tripled down with the most absurd claims on the planet. Like, spleen cancer that's not a thing. And uterine cancer would be called something like uterine cancer. Was it cervical? Was it uterine? Was it, you know, like, so there's just these things when you're in with the cancer community, you have a really good understanding of. And I think that's why people got so angry. It's because people could have died from what Belle did. I'll give you another example. My parents, when I was 17, they took me to a Reiki specialist because, you know, things were really bad. And the Reiki specialist suggested I don't do chemotherapy. I just do Reiki.
Wow.
And thankfully, you know, my parents, they have a lot of faults, but this wasn't one. They were like, you're out of your mind. We're not doing that. Do your Reiki, and then we're going to go.
Well,
and we're going to go get our treatment.
Wow. And people like that are everywhere, I think, on that type of level. You experienced it. What is surprising is that no one, at least that I know of, I haven't read, I could be wrong, are suing Belle, a person who downloaded the app, and were there Apple lawsuits, you know, people who decided to quit their chemo, their radiation, and just fully follow this diet plan. But like, how long, you know, I'm not sure, maybe you know this, how long was the app up? You know what I mean? Was it just like a couple weeks? Was it a couple months?
No.
How long was it?
This was from, so in 2013, Apple awarded Belle Gibson with the best new food and drink app, which gave her credibility. That was in 2013. And the civil lawsuits, so there were lawsuits with Belle Gibson, but they were all civil. And that went until 2015. Okay. So the window when the app started to when the downfall came was 2 years, about 2013 to like late 2015 is
I
when
bet you some people tried to sue Apple. Don't you think?
Oh, I would absolutely, like, that is a rabbit hole I feel like we should go to. Oh, I'm sure.
They probably scrubbed that the hell out. Yeah.
It was like no one with this woman did their due diligence.
That is what's nuts to me. Right? Yeah, that's from the standpoint of she never showed her medical records, never proved that she had cancer. Penguin Books.
Which, by the way,
yes.
She said she didn't want to do that because they brought up negative energy. And then I thought to myself when she said that, I was like, well, then I have boxes of negative energy in my basement. Maybe that's why my luck has been so bad. I'm just kidding.
Burn them, Melissa.
Medical records, that's the thing. Like, people who are faking stuff, they'll always, like Brooks, you know,
yes.
On Real, right? They always will find something. Mm-hmm. Like, if people were like, hey, Melissa, we think you're faking this, I could produce records, like boxes, within 4.2 seconds. And
right.
So that's always to me just like a little red flag that I wanted to point out, but please continue.
You're absolutely right. I mean, and the fact that Penguin Books, who published her book,
yes.
and Apple, both, you know, and obviously they go hand in hand because I'm sure at that point, I think Penguin was second in line.
Yes. Yes,
they probably
were.
will Apple, like they gave her an entire app that's preloaded onto your watch and your phone or whatever. So if that is such a gross error. I can't even imagine how that works, how Apple, such a big corporation, were to have dropped the ball like that. But perhaps they had a loophole because maybe the app didn't say anything about her fighting cancer in the description. That's possible. Maybe the story was out there, but maybe they didn't include that in that. Although, with her book, that was part of the big story, is that she did fight cancer.
With the book, I know for sure is that what I saw when I was watching this, I watched it, of course, a couple of times, is that Penguin at the end, they knew something was off, but they had too much into it and they went ahead with it anyway.
Yeah, wow. I mean...
And I think, and so for me, this is one of those things where cancer patients need to understand that corporations don't give a shit. They don't. If you want a corporation to care, they care about making money. They don't care about us. They just don't. And so I think that's the problem, is sometimes people look for these like ethical corporations, and in my opinion, they do not exist. And so
I mention that the downfall of both Scamanda and Belle Gibson was whomever investigated was the fraud. Like, that was the only way they could take them down, because you can't accuse someone of faking cancer unless you see their medical records. And in both cases, they wouldn't show it. So in the Scamanda situation, they got her on fraud for, getting money from the church, getting money from people. And that's how they took her down. And the same with Belle Gibson, that it was the charities. That's how they get them. Right. And because even still, you can't, even if you've got 1 million people screaming, and including family members, you don't have cancer and you're faking it. There's nothing anyone can do about it because you can't get their medical records, which is amazing and also terrifying, because you know that, yeah.
It's like how, I see how this happens, because, and that's the other thing, whenever I tell people I have cancer, I kind of get like the head tilt and the sad little face, and people are afraid to confront it, and so it's like people knew that what Belle Gibson was saying, she had a friend there were a couple people in this specific docu-series. Her name was Chanel, and Chanel was a friend and a community member of Belle. And Chanel was the first person to say, wait a second, this doesn't add up. Something isn't right here. But you're right, to your point, unless you do something where, it's not illegal to lie. Number one, it's not illegal to misrepresent yourself. The laws around this are very murky. And until you do something to like mess with someone's money, which unfortunately that's not the only thing that matters, but that's sometimes the only thing that can get people held accountable. But Chanel, I give people credit for looking at this and saying, wait, this doesn't make sense. In fact, the friend noticed that when Belle, there was a couple month period where she insisted that she was in remission, and then she claimed that everything was back. And it was like her I found this so fascinating, and I just wanted to mention it was her child's birthday party, Belle's own child. And she faked a seizure.
Yeah.
At the child's birthday party. And then when someone said, hey, we need to call an ambulance, she like came out of it and she was like, no, I'm straight. Let's have some cake.
Right. I'm straight.
And Chanel was like, what's that? That's definitely not how this is supposed to work.
Right. Psych.
But the thing is, so like, no, please go ahead.
Well, I don't want to disrupt the flow. I do want to ask you about how shocking it was for me to find out that she actually had a son. And I also want to talk about her mom and her upbringing, because the only thing that I found really interesting about the dramatization of this story that was inspired by and in Apple Cider Vinegar was that by the end of it, they really made it look like, it started in her childhood. obviously. And her mother was a terrible, neglectful mother. And she did not give her the proper care and attention. And that Belle kept making up these big things to get her attention, and her mother didn't care, even when she was like, Mom, I just had a heart attack, or like, I just went to the hospital, and because and her mom was like, you look fine to me, I mean, so for it do you think that it came from that, not having the attention from her mom, and it just became part of who she is, and it just became and merged in with an occupation? I mean, because she was very young when she did all this, by the way. She was like 26, right? When she did this app. Yeah. I mean, that's like, that's very, very young. And you're ripe to pull a scam. You got all the energy in the world.
Right.
you can tackle anything when you're young, right? So she was at the peak of her scam time. But so if it's not derailing us, I'd love for you to talk about how it connects with her childhood and what you know about that.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point, because for me, I think in my personal practice, our early childhood experiences, our attachments, our family of origin is the first precipice that kind of can lead us to other harmful things in our life, right? And so that's one difference between Scamanda and Elizabeth Finch. I think that they, again, were just more criminal. They were more antisocial, more scammers. But Belle, I feel, to your point, it came from a very inconsistent childhood where she wasn't given the attention she needs and deserves. And so what happens is all human beings, we need love. We need attention. We need support. I mean, there are really few things we need in this world outside of like connectedness, love, and support. Like those are our main, and safety, right? Those are our main needs, especially when we're children. And so what children do is they learn to get their needs met. And then it becomes, I think for Belle, it became what I would call a maladaptive method of coping. So she tried everything she could to get the attention from the one person in the world who she's supposed to get that attention from. Our parents are the only people in the known universe who are the only people responsible for giving us unconditional love and positive regard. And so when we don't get that from our parents, that's where the maladaptive coping comes in terms of telling these little lies. And then, maybe it gave her a bump of attention. Maybe someone said, oh my gosh, we're so sorry. Are you okay?
Right.
And I think for Belle, it did, to your very good question. It started, the seed was planted very early. And then she just, I talk about epigenetics a lot, where epigenetics is where our genetics meets our environment. And there are certain things now that we know scientifically, where we may be born with a predisposition to a certain gene for, drug and alcohol addiction or, criminality or what have you, but the environment turns that gene on. And so it really is a complex symphony. I keep using that word, but to me, that's the best word to describe how this happens. It's a complex symphony of all the right things to create this human being who's so desperate for love, support, and attention that she keeps looking for it in the wrong rooms. Right. Yeah.
And that's the really, really devastating part of when having a mental health condition, is that it started somewhere, for the most part. I don't know, maybe not everywhere, but that it starts from abuse, neglect, all the terrible things. And that's where, I come in and I'm like, I want to have compassion for this person, but like, and I do deep down, but it's awful what they ended up doing. So having the seed planted there, and then having her repeating the cycle of, now she has a son, and now he's watching all of this, and she knows what a horrible upbringing she had, and yet here she is, her son is terrified. His mother fell on the ground and had a seizure at his birthday party.
And, so back to that point is that look at the circumstances of that, right? So Belle is in such desperate need for attention that when her own child is getting the attention that she so desperately wants, she can't handle it. And so what I think happened with Belle is that what the psychologist in this docuseries said, she described pathological lying so well, where it starts off as a need. You're trying to get your needs met, right? For attention and love. And then it just like snowballs, because the thing is, like, one lie leads to another lie, leads to another lie. And make no mistake, I mean, Belle Gibson, there is pathological lying for sure. That I think just snowballed, and I think that she didn't know how to stop it. And the problem is that any regular grifter would say, okay, so I got away with it. People think that I'm a cancer survivor. I have this app. I have all this. Let me just go ahead and run with that narrative, but just like
quit while you're ahead. But like a gambling addict, you're not going to leave the casino with all the money you just won.
Correct. And that was for me where Belle Gibson, like Scamanda and Elizabeth Finch, I'm going to be frank, I want to punch them both in the face, like so hard. If I would never, but like I really do just want to just give them one good punch. Belle, I feel sad for. I do feel this sense of like, she is not mentally well, even the way that she talks.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that, like the interviews and all the stuff that's online. When you're watching her, Melissa, well, actually, you know what? This is actually a great time to take a break. So hold on. When we come back, we're going to talk more about Belle Gibson. And this is an amazing collab with your Bish therapist and trauma darling. So we'll be right back. Thank you so much. We are back. Thank you for listening to the ads. Because of these ads, we are able to do what we do. So thank you for supporting our shows. Okay, so Melissa.
Yes, thank you.
When you are watching the interviews, the 60-minute interview, I don't know if you saw the practice interview that she had with her, with the Penguin people, all that stuff. What are you looking at? How do you size that up?
So she has this way of speaking that one of the journalists used the term, and I'm going to use it because it's a big word, but it's so descriptive for what she's doing. It's called obfuscating. And to obfuscate means to take a question and to muddy it around because you don't want to give a direct answer. You don't know how to give a direct answer. You don't know you have no relationship with the truth. Belle would do this obfuscating thing where she would talk about something else and she would ramble and just go on and on and on. And so I actually, in psychology, when you're doing assessments on people, there's something called affect. And our affect refers to the outward expression of emotion as observed by others. And so there's different categories of affect. And so Belle Gibson had an affect that I believed was inappropriate. An inappropriate affect means that there's a disconnect between like an emotional and a psychological experience. And I could tell that she had a very, I don't know if I would call it inappropriate or I would call it a labile affect is another descriptor for when, like, for people with bipolar disorder, when they're kind of up and down, that's kind of known as labile or kind of, shifting in and out of moods. And so I noticed a lot of very odd affect from her, and the way that she spoke gave me, I'm going to be honest, it reminded me of doing interviews with people who had psychosis. Wow, I don't believe that Belle necessarily had psychosis, but she talked in this way that was so bizarre and, just run on sentences, no beginning, middle, and end to thoughts, no punctuation, just, kind of round and round she goes. So I think part of that was her need to hide things because she was a liar. But I think part of it also was, as her mental health, it's like, okay, for example, when people start using drugs, you start with a little bit, and then by the time you're addicted, you're using an insane amount that would kill a horse, right? I feel like with Belle, it's the same thing, but just like instead of drugs, it was like mental health. I feel like I watched her mental health just deteriorate. And as the attention got bigger and as the lies got bigger, I just got the sense that it was like she was like being taken under by the waves of like reality.
Yeah.
She didn't know how to manage reality.
And you know, when you're young like that, you do think you know everything and you can do anything. And so you add that on to everything that you just said, and it's explosive. And when she's really getting essentially busted, you know, by these interviewers, the practice interview, she realized like the jig is up, you know, I mean, everything, the jig was up. She knew that, but she still managed to push through with tears, with, like you said, obfuscating. She even said in the practice interview, she's like, oh, I can just deflect. I'll just deflect that. And it's like, so she knows this, what she's doing deliberately, and that they're in on it, kind of thing, like a wink, wink. And then also her ability to cry is also really a phenomenal thing, because I think to myself, is she crying because she's busted, or is she crying because it looks very real? Is she crying, Melissa, because she's busted, or is she crying because she really believes these lies? Like, so did she believe that she had brain cancer, and did she believe that it spread? Like, where, when you're a pathological liar, are you believing for real that you're convincing yourself? How does that work?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Pathological lying, what can end up happening is as people lose touch with reality, because the more you lie, the further you become from being able to touch reality. That's just how it is. And I think that my answer is both. I think it's both that she was being asked hard questions that she couldn't deflect from. Number one, and I think that freaked her out, because she was always able to shuck and jive. She was always able to get away from it. So I think she felt profoundly wounded, truly, by the fact that like she could no longer obfuscate and get out of this. But there is a part of me that also believes that she had lost such touch with reality that she believed. Like, I wondered this, Amy, if you gave her a lie detector test, if you believe the lie, that's all you need to pass a lie detector test. Do you believe the lie? Yeah. In fact, people who are con artists, they will, that's how they are able to pass lie detectors. Do you believe the lie? Because if you do, then it's not a lie to you.
That's right.
And so I think she developed this very tenuous relationship with the truth. And I do think in that interview, the 60 Minutes interview with that very hard-hitting journalist, I think she felt like, no, I did think that I was sick, and I thought I was trying to do a good thing. I do think there's a kernel of truth in that for her. And
she probably also is hurt because she thinks that she's helped people. And correct. You know, I'm sure that people probably really enjoyed the recipes and enjoyed healthy eating, and that's why it was so popular. I mean, the pictures were amazing and all, you know, but how much more did it hurt than help? And it's all a complete lie at the expense of, like you said, if she would have just taken all the momentum that she has and all the brilliance that it took to get to where she got without the lies, but she wouldn't have been able to. I wonder if she would have even been able to get there, because there's nothing driving it. The stakes are so low that, you know, what's the purpose? You know, when you say, you said when you're watching her talk, it kind of looked like psychosis. So I want to kind of try to ask you a couple questions about that. So when I'm watching her and I see her eyes, like, they look like, you know, they're getting shifty. They're getting real shifty. And she's starting, but you can see it kind of gloss over, like she's not really there. And so is that what you mean? Because I don't understand what it means to look at psychosis.
So what I mean by what you're describing, that's called dissociation. So dissociation is where you take a real life experience that you're feeling, and because of, usually dissociation is something that forms as a result of trauma, and usually as a result of intense trauma. And I will share that's something that I have experienced myself in my PTSD journey. And what happens is when people are extremely traumatized and they are immediately, for their mental health, they're able to switch off. They're able to almost like shut it down, shut your brain, your body down, and you are all of a sudden feeling nothing. You are not in reality. You are in your own world of nothing that's real, but it happens. And I think that there's a part of her that dissociates. It's a little bit more than deflection. There's just like a piece of her. You're right. The eyes tell such a story where something will click, and then it'll just be like she goes from hurt to just being numb. And so I think that Belle, from what I saw from the interview with her brother and from hearing about the things that happened with her mother before she died, I think that there were real needs there that she learned to shut off. And then when she turned them on, she just looked in the wrong spaces for those needs to be met, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It makes a lot of sense. Dissociating is a very big trending thing now. I don't know if you've noticed it. A lot of people are using it, and they're saying it wrong. Everyone's saying, I'm disassociating. They're saying disassociate. Yeah. And so I just find it interesting when these types of, terms become like, get in the hands of the people and they misuse them and also mispronounce them. I just think it's interesting.
I know the TikTokification of like therapy terms has just become so wild. Everyone thinks that they're dissociating, and it's like, no, you're not. You're just stressed out and you're having trouble focusing on things. Not everybody is autistic. Not everybody has ADHD. Not everybody dissociates. So yeah, I think that's the TikTokification of all of that does really irritate me, because it leads people to self-pathologize, and that's the opposite of what we should be doing. But that's my own
speaking of autism, she accused her brother of having autism, and he's in the interview, and his eyes are very back and forth. I noticed there's something about him that's going on that I can't quite put my finger on it. We're not diagnosing anything, but I did feel very bad for him, because he said that she used to call him a lot of really cruel names, and that's awful. Do you think that her mom, it says that her mom died in 2017 and from MS. So do you think that that's a lie, allegedly?
No. So the one thing I did do a deep dive on is the fact that her mom, and the stepdad confirmed this in the interview. So the mom did have MS growing up, when she was growing up, and she did have to do some caretaking. And I believe that this is where that seed was sprouted. Right? Because, like Scamanda, when you're around these people, when you're, nannying for this kid who has cancer in the case of Scamanda, or, all of these people, the one thing they have in common is they've all come up against like a blueprint of how to do this in their real lives. All of them. That's one thing they all have in common. And so I think that, Belle said that thing about her brother, I believe, to get more attention, because it's not just about her health issues. She wanted to talk about these other people's health issues. But I do think that her mom, the stepdad, said that MS wasn't as bad as Belle made it seem. However, I do think there was some real damage done there, in terms of her little psyche, learning like, oh, well, when you're sick, people bring you food. Well, when you're sick, people give you attention, which I just have to say, side note here, the thing probably that makes me the most angry watching all of these is that I get zero attention. No one gives two hoots. No one brings me meals. No one has given me $1, which, by the way, I wouldn't want it, right? Like, if people are asking for money, that's also kind of a red flag, but like, no one has ever done anything like any of this for me. And I'm like, that's what I think also angers cancer survivors, is that most of us don't ever receive this level of support. And when you receive, and that really is the currency that matters most to us. It's not money, it's support and love. And so when these people are getting so much and we get like nothing, it's like, what the hell? How is that fair?
It's not balanced. It doesn't make sense.
No.
And also the people who really have. All right. I'm going to send you some factor meals with my code DRAMA.
I love that. Love that.
No, you want a casserole, you know? I mean, you're like Vicky Gunvalson. You just wanted a casserole for Brooks's fake cancer. But you're actually a real person. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But so I think that Belle definitely learned at an early age that if you want to get needs met, it has to be through sickness. Because the other thing with Belle is that when one of the journalists did a deep dive into her, they found out in 2009 she was on this skateboard forum. And for people listening to us, unless you're our age, you're not going to understand the crazy early aughts, like internet, whatever it was. It was such a Wild West bizarre time. And she was on the skate forum. It was called Skateroo. And one of her former friends on the skate forum developed a brain tumor, the same one that she went on to claim that she had.
Oh,
and so,
right. I forgot about that.
Yes,
Whoa.
but look, here's my point. So Belle went on these skate forums after, and by the way, the friend died because when you really have a brain tumor that's stage 4, you don't survive it. There's no surviving. And so her friend died, and then in mid 2009, after the friend died, she started posting crazy stories about needing open heart surgery. And there was something just so little that stuck out in my brain. She would write on this forum to the skater guys about, if you don't send me flowers, you're dead.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. And here's what I'm pointing out about this is like, I don't know if you know anything about the skater community, but like they're not who you go to for support for health issues.
How dare you categorize skaters as being cold-hearted? Oh, Melissa.
No. Listen, I hung out with skaters in high school, but what I mean is that they're not the most
they're not
emotionally supportive group of folks, is my point.
But they want to shred, okay? Leave them alone.
Yeah. They want to smoke weed. They want to drink their 40s. They want to shred. They want to, whatever. God bless. Do your thing. Who cares? But my point is that Belle kept finding herself in rooms, quite literally, where she didn't belong. And then she just happens to stumble upon this app. And then I just think it gave her whole life what she was looking for, but also the skater part. Did you see pictures from her back then? She was like a totally different
black hair and
Yeah, she looked like, an early aughts emo skater chick, like black hair, the blunt bangs and like, party, that sort of thing. And so what I gathered from that too, which was so interesting, is just that she's been trying on personas because Belle doesn't know who Belle is.
Yeah.
She really has some serious identity issues because anyone who can kind of go in and out of identities like that is looking for something. Usually.
Yeah.
And listen, teenage years, that's a totally appropriate
that's what you do.
Thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. But if you're carrying that mallet, and so this is where a tendency kind of turns into disorder when it becomes like this maladaptive pattern that it kind of worsens over time. So that's where like a narcissistic trait or tendency or like antisocial traits maybe will cross into disorder. That's kind of the defining characteristic.
And this is another great time to take a quick break.
These cancer scammers thrive off of.
Yes.
They thrive off of your fears and your anxieties and the fact that we have no control in our lives. And humans hate that. Everything human beings do basically is to gain some sort of sense of control. That's what eating disorders are all about. I'm going to control what I put in my body. I'm going to control what I don't put in my body. So I think that the worst thing that this does is it takes advantage of vulnerable population of humans who are just desperate to try to gain some control over some really challenging stuff.
One of the things that was in the dramatization about Belle Gibson was a whole other aspect of how this industry of what you just talked about takes advantage. They're vampires, and how they take advantage of people who are vulnerable, not even just with cancer, but with emotional, situations. And so they're around every corner because we're always looking to better ourselves, looking for another alternative way to heal ourselves physically or mentally and emotionally. And you open up your phone, it'll be right there in front of your face. You turn the corner, it'll be right there. It'll be at the bookstore, anywhere. And if you are vulnerable to that, it will find you and you will find it. And it really is terrifying. And that's why I think when we look at what these scam artists have done, you feel so horrible for the people that have been hurt because they didn't ask for that. They're just looking for answers. They're looking for healing. And it's like, wolves in sheep's clothing, and it's
exactly right.
Terrifying.
And that's why I'm glad I have a very loud voice and a platform, because I want people to know that I was one of those people who was fooled. I was one of those people who was harmed. And I have committed my life to making sure that I advocate for myself and others so that never, ever happens again. I want everyone listening to this to know you can't eat your way out of this. You can't juice your way out of this. It's, I just want people to try to be their best selves and not fall prey to this. But it really is so easy when you're so vulnerable. And so if anything, too, sharing my story, it just helps to validate maybe some things that some people are going through. People look at me and they think, oh, well, you're really smart. Well, I felt for it too. And I am smart. I take in microbiology. I know
it has nothing to do with intelligence. It really doesn't. And because everybody's looking for the thing that you were, and what everyone looks for is an answer.
Right. And that's right. A way to just and not just people who have cancer, people who are healthy. Like, how do I prevent this? Yeah, exactly. How do I age gracefully and, keep, my health and the health of my family? And so it's such an area that is so rife for scammers. It just makes me crazy. And so for me, red flags are if people are asking something of you. I think that's really important to note red flags. Like, if all of a sudden I went on my podcast and I was like, hey, contribute to this, or hey, do this, or whatever, like, I'm giving information for free because I actually want to help people. When you go on Instagram and you see these therapists or these coaches that are like, well, buy this. And it's like, okay, listen, we all have to make a living. But I think what I'm telling people is you have to be so thoughtful and run it by somebody. That's the other thing, is because this happened to me because I was isolated and alone, and I didn't want to share with anybody my fears and my stressors. If you share with someone, hey, this is what I'm afraid of, and this is what I've been doing, people, like, if you're stuck in like a little area of being blinded by something, people outside can see and help pluck you out of it. And that's why it's so important to have supports for things like cults too, right? To have people to say,
I immediately thought of that.
Yeah. I think if you have good, trusted friends, loved ones, people who you can really trust to say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. And then they can say, you know what, that's a little wacky. We got to look at this. I think that's really, really important. But one thing I wanted to point out too is that one of the main indicators between like, I know we talked about Belle Gibson more framed as like a mental health issue versus like Scamanda, who was more like criminal. One of the major differences in what is like a mental health issue, which is versus what's like psychopathy. Psychopathy is a term for like sociopath, psychopath. Those are like kind of things that like the TikTokification has made really popular. But essentially psychopathy, the one thing you have to have with psychopathy is lack of empathy. And I think that Belle definitely had a lack of empathy for other people because she was so self-focused. Like her narcissistic traits and tendencies, I think, took it to another level, and she stopped caring like even about her son and his special day, and like it was all about her. And I think the same thing with Scamanda, which is like for Scamanda, I mean the clear and persistent pattern of just like absolutely no empathy. Some of the other just like a couple of other things that I just wanted to put out there is, so typical psychopathic traits are like manipulating, exploiting, or violating rights of others, lack of concern, guilt, or remorse for their actions. And that's definitely something I feel like I noticed with Belle, like all of them for sure. But with Belle too, there was like this very stubborn, I'm not, like she didn't want to,
she wasn't copping to nothing. Yeah.
No. Irresponsible behavior and disregard for typical social behavior, relationship difficulties, and repeatedly breaking the law. Those are kind of like the main characteristics for, excuse me, for psychopathy. Yeah. And when you look at all that definition, it's like, wow, that kind of describes them all in a lot of ways, doesn't it?
It does. And you had kind of separated them in that you feel like Scamanda and Elizabeth Finch are more, well, you did say that they're more of a criminal as opposed to...
I think they were more devious. Wow. Yeah, more criminally devious. I think they were more well aware of their actions, and they were more behaving like true criminals. Whereas Belle, I think she has all of these same criteria, but I think hers comes more from a place of, I don't want to say trauma, but just like what we had talked about with her upbringing. And listen, I'm sure if we looked into Scamanda and if we looked into Elizabeth Finch, their childhood, I guarantee there would be stuff there. Like this does not crop out of nowhere.
Right.
But I'm just saying that I think that Belle, there's more of a mental health component, whereas the other two, I just get the sense that the other two were just like, I know what I'm doing. I don't care. I need the money for this. I need the attention for that. I need the career and whatever. It was much more self-serving, where I think Belle really thought she was helping people. And she just couldn't reconcile the fact that, no, you're actually hurting people. She was like, no, not me.
Okay. Interesting. I wouldn't have seen that had you not pointed that out.
And listen, I could be wrong. That's just my interpretation. That's what I've observed. I would love to hear what other people think. That's just personally my perspective. It totally makes
sense. It completely makes sense. Gosh, it's so it's horrifying, and it's also really, really sad. It's sad to see someone just straight up busted, and then trying to wiggle their way out of it. You're like, ooh, it's so uncomfortable. But you're like, also, you did this. You need to be held accountable. And I mean, you have to, but when she's in these interviews and she's talking, and as you described earlier, how she never finishes a sentence and it's kind of cyclical and she's obfuscating. Well, I have to guess that the reason why no one ever saw that before is just because all the relationships around her were really professional, and the ones that actually knew her didn't believe her. And she was really, as you said, very isolated from everyone, with the exception of her partner, who was the person that was really raising her child. So like that person, we didn't really get into that person has their own story on this dramatization, but so I don't really know the real story. But it's like no one ever really knew her. You were just getting her shtick and her,
right.
you know?
Right.
So
because,
how did anybody?
But I think that,
yeah.
I think that was because Belle didn't know Belle. Like, you can't know someone who doesn't know themselves. And so, but Amy, one thing we forgot to mention that I just, thank God I looked through my notes. Remember when Belle had like aggressive and volatile fights with her mom, and she moved out when she was 13 years old to live with some old man down the road.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember the brother being like, what on earth is this about? Number one. And number two, it was like, was nobody worried about why an older man would have wanted a 13-year-old child living with him? Mm-hmm. And it makes me wonder that as someone who is so desperate for attention and love, it does make me wonder what happened behind the closed doors in that house. It does.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And she had a mother and a stepfather at that time.
Right. It's like, so you have a mom, a stepdad, and a brother. Why on earth are you moving down the street at age 13 to live with an old man and everyone is just okay with this? I will never understand that in my life.
So why didn't they call the police? You know, I mean, at the very least.
Thank you. So it's like, I think that the point too is that there is always so much that we don't know, even in situations where we think we know, or there's documentaries. It's like, what happened in her childhood? What happened in that home? What happened to make her leave her own home to live with that older man? I just think it all creates such a rich tapestry for exactly what happened to happen.
It sure does.
Because imagine if she had a mother who was like, listen, I know we're not getting along, but I love you. We're going to work this out. Let's go to therapy. Let's, you can't just move down the street to live with some gross old man.
Right.
Who wants a 13-year-old living with him. That's not like his relative. That's so odd. But also, I really do wonder for the people listening to this in Australia, like, what would people have made of that in the neighborhood? Like, if that happened here, I feel like people would be protesting. People would call the police. I just don't understand how that was allowed to happen. But
well, obviously, in their neighborhood, that people clearly didn't have neighborly relations. They probably didn't really even know each other, didn't care, and nobody knew.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's true. And then at the end of this, I also read in my notes, she popped up pretending she was an Ethiopian community member.
Oh my gosh.
Do you remember that?
I cannot believe that. Yes. Okay.
Like,
I'm sorry.
A la Rachel Dolezal?
Yeah. And that really sealed it all in a perfect little, that was the bow and the cherry on the top of all this, because it just shows you, as you said, I mean, so what is that? I mean, is that an identity crisis? She doesn't know who she is? Is she, like, what would you call that? She was a completely different person. After all this went away, you guys, she's moved on with her life, and there's footage of her talking to somebody about raising awareness for the Ethiopian community and speaking Ethiopian. And she's in their traditional garb. Yeah. And it's like the Belle Gibson whole pantry book, everything you would know her to be is completely erased. And this is a totally different persona. So What is that? That's not multiple personalities, because
definitely not.
So what do you call that? I mean, not that we're diagnosing, but if you were to make a guess.
So I call that a mix of she has no identity whatsoever, and her whole shtick was just like taking over like the identities of you. I called it cosplaying, right? So at first she cosplayed like a skater chick, and then she cosplayed like Gwyneth Paltrow, and then she cosplayed an Ethiopian community member, which, like, as a white woman, are you out of your mind? That is so freaking offensive. It's ridiculous. But I look at it as two things. I look at it as she is just so desperate for a sense of belonging, a sense of community,
yes.
and a sense of belonging also that makes her feel some sort of sense of identity. Yes. But there's another part of it that, you know, is criminal in that she knows she's not Ethiopian. I mean, you just made your fortune on being a basic white woman. So it's like she didn't forget. So to me, this is where the weird amalgamation of Belle Gibson comes in, where it's like part attention-seeking identity crisis and then part psychopathology a little bit, I would say. Or, I mean, you can't have a little bit of psychopathology. It's like being a little bit pregnant, but yeah, I'm trying to be cautious with my words.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
I think, to be honest, it's just a combination of both. And it did remind me of Rachel Dolezal, who I watched her. Are you familiar with that woman?
Yes.
I watched her documentary, and it was interesting. And the only parallels I'll draw here is that Rachel Dolezal truly believes, like, she's a white woman from Utah, but she believed that she was transracial. That's what she said. Like, and being transracial, that's not right now a construct that is widely accepted in any way, shape, or form in the communities of, just like education, that's not an accepted theory.
Doesn't exist.
But I think,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think that when it's like Rachel and Belle, they both have this odd thing of like, no, you can't tell me, like, this is how I feel. This is how I feel inside. I don't know. It's just, it's also bizarre. It actually makes me want to go back and maybe do something about Rachel Dolezal. But yeah, Belle, I think it was a mix of things, some narcissism, some psychopathy, and for sure some trauma and need for attention. Kids don't care what attention they get, if it's negative or positive. Like, if a kid is not getting love, and they're going to act out because they don't care if it's positive or negative attention. And I think Belle, sometimes I think it's the same thing. I don't know that she cares if it's positive or negative in any way, shape, or form.
Well, why don't we, let's give last thoughts. And I mean, I think you've done an unbelievable job at this. I also don't want to leave anything off the table that you want to, to bring to it. You did do a wonderful job at explaining some red flags, which is a great way to wrap that up as well. Is there anything else that you want to point out from the documentary or from what you've discovered about Belle Gibson?
I think that, just what I'll say is that all human beings, we all have our stuff, and we all have the capability to be a Belle Gibson, if I'm being honest. It's just a matter of, what do we do with our needs and our desires? For example, growing up, I didn't get, love or attention, and I chose not to be a Belle Gibson. I don't know if I chose it or I just was resilient, or I have no idea, but I think the message is that if you're engaging with somebody and it just doesn't feel right, please listen to your gut. Because
great advice.
The people in the scenario who extricated themselves were people who started to feel something's odd here, and then they listened to that gut.
Yeah.
I felt like something was off, but I was too afraid to listen to my gut. And so I think that our intuition, when we're centered, is never wrong. Now, listen, trauma can affect our intuition, right? It can screw things up, and that's how this happens too. But like, if you just feel weird about something that you're in, whether it's a community group, a Facebook group, a food group, like whatever it is, just please listen, honor that, and at least talk to somebody you love and you trust about, hey, I'm having some of these concerns, whether it be for myself or with this group. Can I ask your opinion? What do you think? Because secrets keep us sick. And I think that's the thing too, is like, if we're trying to heal and get well, do it out loud, where people can say, hey, I noticed this, or hey, maybe you're missing this, or, I think those would be my final thoughts for this whole thing.
Wow. Secrets keep us sick. That's a great way to end it. Melissa Reich, Amy Phillips, who brought tremendous amount to the table. I'm kidding. What a journey this was. Thank you so much to your listeners, to my listeners who were listening. And obviously, you can find me over anywhere you get your podcasts twice a week, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sometimes I pop Monday and Wednesday in there. And then, of course, over on patreon.com/Drama Darling. And then Drama Darling on Instagram. Melissa?
Yeah, so you can watch the full video of this on my Patreon. If you would like to not just listen to Amy and I, if you would like to see our beautiful faces, which Amy, your light is always so much better than mine. I'm envious of your lighting.
Pretty much, I've got a light structure going on here.
I know, and every time I think I get my light right, I look at you and I'm like, no, back to the drawing board.
I'll send you what I have if you're interested.
Okay. So please check this out on Patreon. Also, this podcast will be coming out on Tuesday. And you can find me everywhere on social media. Your Bish Therapist. Please check me out, especially Patreon. We have a lot, Amy, you and I, we have a lot of Darling Bish crossover.
Yeah. Oh, baby,
and so,
yes.
People really love when we do this. But, Amy, can I ask you one last question?
Yes. I am lying about everything. I am not a podcaster. And I am not a comedian. No, I'm kidding. Yes.
Wouldn't that be wild? No.
Yeah. I don't know what I could be lying about, but yeah.
Yeah, right. Being fabulous. You're not lying about that. With the search for Instagram's worst con artist versus you watched Apple Cider Vinegar, I really didn't watch that. For people listening, would you recommend one over the other?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Watch the documentary. I mean, because you're going to get the facts. Yeah, you got to go with the documentary. Absolutely.
But you still liked Apple Cider Vinegar. Is that something?
It just is an incredibly well done series, and it is really sad and heartbreaking and very, very difficult to watch. I will say that. And a trigger warning for anyone who is a cancer survivor. I almost don't know. I mean, I don't know how you did this, Melissa. I would find it extremely difficult to talk about this if I was in your shoes or anyone who has struggled with their health, because to watch it unfold, to hear it, it's really disgusting. And then when you have had that, it's very difficult. And especially the dramatization, because it does such a great job, though, at telling the story about real cancer and what people deal with. And I mean, to the level of which they're able to, on Netflix, and they have different angles throughout the entire story, really different. The father is completely against what, one of the daughters doing by going to this Hirsch Institute with, and of course you get all the different aspects completely dramatized, and it's great. And the acting is phenomenal. It's really, really well done. So from that perspective, I would say yes, but I wouldn't just go to that and not watch the documentary, because the documentary is also only 2 episodes and it's pretty phenomenal. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. You had a flawless wrap up going, but I just had to ask you that one last question because I was just so curious to see if I should watch it. And also, I know people appreciate a trigger warning. So, fellow cancer thrivers, use your best judgment if you're going to watch that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you, Amy. I'm so happy to have done this.
Me
Love
too.
you all.
Mwah, 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 mwah.